What is the longest book you've ever read? I'm asking this question because I'm currently reading Stephen King's It again. Yes, again. It's my favorite Stephen King book. Psychotic clowns are my comfort food. I've been reading it for about 3 weeks now, and I've got about a quarter of the book left to go. Now, I'm a fairly fast reader. In fact, the only person I know personally who I know reads faster than me uninterrupted is my wife. But I'm also a full-time dad, and a teacher, and a carbon-based life form, so I need things like food and sleep. I can't read 24/7 as much as I might like to, and that makes a doorstopper like It take some time to get through. But it's not the longest book that Stephen King ever wrote, which is a question that often comes up whenever I tell people that I'm reading this behemoth. Now, this particular edition is 1,090 pages long, but that doesn't actually matter. Readers like to measure books in pages because it's easy to find that number, but page count can be changed by the font size, the paper size, whether or not it has any illustrations. Any of a dozen different formatting issues can change the page count of a book. Writers usually measure their work by word count, which tends to stay consistent from one edition to another, no matter what. Unless, of course, the writer pulls a George Lucas and goes in and starts making changes. Which, to be fair, Stephen King has done on occasion. So I decided to look up the word count of some of Stephen King's books. Now, these numbers come from that preeminent literary scholar Google, so I can't be 100% sure of the accuracy, but I think they're probably close enough for the sake of discussion. It clocks in at a whopping 441,156 words. That's a lot of prepositions, my friends. But it is not King's longest book. It's edged out by almost a full novella's length by the uncut edition of The Stand, which comes in at about 468,000 words. This is an example of King making his changes. The original version was a measly 308,000 words. The uncut version is King's preferred edition, and it's the only one you can really find anymore. Now, I realize this might seem a little abstract to you if you're not familiar with this kind of stuff, so let me give you the word counts of some books that you might have read in school or otherwise are familiar with just for the sake of comparison. F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, often required reading in most American high schools, is only 47,000 words. It's pretty short. That means that It is nearly 10 Gatsbys long. By modern publishing standards, it wouldn't even be considered a novel, it would be a novella. Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 is even shorter, only 46,000 words. Lord of the Flies by William Golding is a little bit longer, 52,000 words. And George Orwell's 1984 gets a little bit beefier at 76,000 words. That's about the same length as the shortest Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the first one in the series. The longest book in the series, Order of the Phoenix, balloons up to 257,000 words. More than half in It, but still not getting close to the top of the list. Other popular novels you may have read. Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games, the original trilogy, each one of those books is about 100,000 words, give or take a few thousand on either side. Stephenie Meyer's first Twilight book is 119,000 words. Then there's George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. We think of these as being huge books. The shortest one is the first one, A Game of Thrones, at about 293,000. The longest so far, A Dance with Dragons, is about 415,000 words. Now, if there are ever any more books in this series, we'll have to adjust this list, but who we kidding? Now, I've read every book that I've mentioned so far, so the question of longest book seems to be answered by The Stand, right? But does that make it the longest book ever written? Not even close. The Guinness Book of Records says that the longest book ever published is Marcel Proust's A Remembrance of Things Past from 1912. This comes in at 1.3 million words, almost 3 stands. But I have not read this book, and I'm not gonna. Other books at the top of this list include Poor Fellow, My Country by Xavier Herbert at about 852,000, A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, about 594,000 words, and Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, about 562,000 words. Again, I haven't read any of these, so The Stand's place seems to be pretty secure. Unless Tolkien. J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Most people consider this a trilogy, and to be fair, that is usually how it's been published, in 3 separate volumes. However, that was a demand from the original publisher, not Tolkien himself, who always envisioned it as one single book. And these days, in fact, 1-volume editions are pretty common and easy to find. And if you combine all 3 volumes as Tolkien intended, you wind up with a book of about 481,000 words, edging out the uncut Stand by about 14,000, or a little less than 1 cycle of the werewolf. The book, not the actual cycle. So there's my answer. If you don't count Lord of the Rings as a single book, the longest book I've ever read is The Stand. If you do count it as one book, then Lord of the Rings is my answer. You know what? I'm going to count it. Who am I to argue with the professor? So Eddie, what should people do?
Drop the longest book in the comments.
You going to argue with that face? Twinkle Twinkle is about 108,000 words. I'm sure of this one.